Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Single Malt Review. We're outside in some lovely whiskey weather, although I'll tell you a secret about whiskey weather. Any weather can be whiskey weather, you just have to have the right mindset. But enough about that. What have you brought for us today, Dave?
Well, had a bit of a surprise recently. I was cooking up a delicious curry for tea, and what's that behind the basmati rice? I thought I'd finished it, turns out I hadn't. It is a bottle of 10-year-old Royal Lochnagar, hailing from Balmoral in the Highlands. Royal Lochnagar have had the royal warrant since 1848. We have here, yes, it's from the Duffy's label by Cadenheads.
Which still exists, it just looks a little bit different. They've streamlined their range a bit so that the Duffys are still in a smooth bottle as opposed to the square ones from their Cask strength range, but it has the slightly more appealing black label and not this stuff that's on here. So, Royal Lochnagar, it's another, funnily enough, Diageo-owned distillery, of which there is a great many, but unlike a lot of the malts that we taste for you here, it actually, most of its make comes out as single malt, although I'm not too familiar with it. It does go into blends, mostly the Johnnie Walker blends, including, apparently, the very prestigious, if you're giving a gift to someone in Dubai, at any rate, very prestigious Johnnie Walker Blue. So there you go. They must think quite highly of it.
It is the only Royal Lochnagar I've had personally, due to the exceptional accessibility and affordability of the Duffy's range.
It doesn't show up in independent bottles too often, and I have no idea why, but I suppose we might just about find out. So it's really quite pale. I'd say we are looking at one bourbon, as far as how it was matured, at least primarily bourbon, and two, I don't think we're looking at first fills either. I'm looking at a piece of garden, so I'll let you get started while I deal with this.
The typically minimalist Duffy's labelling doesn't tell us a whole lot here. We know it's not covered, not filtered. We don't even know what the wood it was matured in. We're told it was an oak cask, which hopefully would go without saying, but what that cask held previously, we don't know. Tim thinks bourbon. I'm inclined to believe him.
The new ones will help you out a bit more. Most of them have tasting notes attached, which is all good until you lose them. But anyway, let's dive in.
A very fine line of oil around there.
First thing I get off this one is a really distinct maltiness. And you'd think that would be fairly obvious given that it was malt whiskey, but actually many malt whiskies, the first thing you get is something else. If it's a distinctly Speyside whiskey, you'll often get fruit coming out forward before the maltiness, and if it's a peated whiskey, you'll always get the peat first, and so on and so on. But this one, it's very malt forward. It's reminding me a little bit of something like a Cragen Moor, which is very, very malt driven. So that's quite interesting.
Again, malt, walnuts, and a little bit of allspice.
There is a few walnuts there now you mention it. That's a good spot. I wouldn't have, without that cue, the walnuts wouldn't have jumped on me, but there's your usual selection of nice sort of heathery Highland fruits and a little bit of honey as well. But let's see what's on the palate. That is nice and mild at
nice.
46%.
Pretty alcohol warmth there.
Really, really good drinking strength on it there. I don't think it's going to need too much water.
Rich, almost savoury bush honey. Some more of that heather.
It's fruitier on the palate than it is on the nose. There's quite a lot of good white fruits. There's sort of white peach, quite a lot of apple and pear. It's, for a Highland malt, it's going for quite a Speyside style. It's really very gentle.
It's not as sweet as I'm used to from Highland.
It doesn't have that extreme honeyed sweetness and sort of floral pungency that you get from some Highlands. It's going for a more of a little bit more austerity than you would normally expect. But of course, all distilleries have their own style. I'll give it just a dab of water.
46%, so I'm going very, very restrained on the water.
And we'll see what that brings out.
There's a little bit of lemonade on the nose now. A little more fruit. Peaches, white fruit you were describing on the palate.
Certainly bringing out the citrus with that addition of water. It's a citrus rind rather than a citrus juice, lemon citrus, I think.
There's a big hit of a chunky bit of marmalade on the palate now. You've bitten into the peel on a preserved lemon or something like it.
Definitely some lovely peel there. It's really quite expressive for a 10-year-old whiskey. It's a 10-year-old whiskey which is fully mature, which is less uncommon than you would think. 10 years old is when really a great many whiskies, if they've been well made and well matured, sort of come good. That's when they start tasting like mature whiskies as opposed to immature whiskies. Of course, it doesn't mean they won't get better or even more interesting as they get older, but it's sort of the point at which they stop tasting young. So at 10 years, this is doing really very well for itself.
Yeah, it still tastes fresh, but it's got a lot of complexity, a lot of the nuances you'd expect from something that's been
And you know, really,
for some time.
for a delicate floral whiskey, having it a bit younger is often quite beneficial because that liveliness, the life and vibrancy in the spirit, you lose that with age. You gain other characters, but you will never get back that freshness and that life that you do from a young spirit. It's all a bit of a balance as to when to bottle it. You know, I think this is a good pick for the day. It's a nice summer day whiskey, good for an early afternoon, or even a late morning if you wanted to be really daring, as I sometimes like to be, before lunch. But scores, which we should give it, I think, you know, that's actually going to be an 81 from me. For what it's going for, I think it's hitting extremely well. It's a whiskey that's trying to be light, crisp and fruity, rather than overly complex or necessarily too overbearing and cerebral, and it's doing it extremely well. What do you think, Dave?
I'm giving this one a 78. A lot of the same strengths that you have picked. It is young and fresh, but still complex, fruity, interesting. It's not as sweet as the Highland whiskies I'm used to, but it's a good thing as well. Having the same thing all the time gets boring.
It's a whiskey,
definitely not boring.
It's a whiskey made for drinking, and it rewards you when you drink it. And there's a lot to be said for that. So, on to the next. We will have a rummage and see what comes out. This has been the Single Malt Review. Do catch us very shortly before our equipment blows away completely. And we'll catch you back. Bye-bye. Well, that is... That'll be a good one.
It blows itself in there.